Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roberto Abreu, and I'm a Ph.D. student at Rutgers University, Newark. The work that I will present today is a collaboration between the Mathematics, Reasoning, and Learning Lab and Dr. Arthur Powell. And the title of my presentation is Children's Non-Symbolic Proportional Knowledge, Cognitive Correlates, and Intervention Effects. Teaching fractions is a major educational challenge. There is a large percentage of students that have difficulties at comparing and performing arithmetical problems that involve fractions. This is critical as fraction knowledge not only has an impact on everyday activities such as cooking, but also on people's academic outcomes, employability, and even on their health. This problem is so obvious that even pharmaceuticals are changing the way that they are representing their adequate dosage. And it's no coincidence that these representations are non-symbolic, as we can compare with relatively ease non-symbolic continuous proportions. For example, if I ask you to compare the proportionally larger red area of these two figures, probably you won't have any trouble to choose the left figure as the figure with the proportionally larger red area. However, the easiness disappears when there is discrete information, and now one has to ignore the fact that in this case, the figure on the left has the smaller number of pieces, but still has the proportionally larger red area. Research with children have shown that they have some knowledge about non-symbolic continuous proportions. For instance, 6 to 10-year-olds can reliably indicate the proportionally larger gray area of these two figures. However, children's skills plummets when they encounter discrete information, in particular when the proportional information is at odds with discrete information. For example, performance of 10-year-olds is no better than guessing. Given the associations between proportional reasoning and formal fraction ability, recent research has looked at the cognitive abilities associated with non-symbolic proportional reasoning, and this research has shown that proportional reasoning is in continuous but not discrete context is related to analogical reasoning. One candidate cognitive ability to contribute to the discrete proportional reasoning is the inhibitory control. This ability allows overriding strong predispositions. For example, if I ask you to name the color ink of this word, you will have to use your inhibitory control to override the automatic response of naming the written information, that is saying red instead of green. And studies have shown that inhibitory control is related to the ability to ignore conflicting information in science. And recently, students have also found a relationship between inhibitory control and symbolic proportional reasoning, with fractions and decimals in other children and adults. There is also a recent interest in examining the malleability of non-symbolic proportional reasoning throughout interventions. In a recent study, children went through a 5-day computerized intervention in which they have to solve non-symbolic proportional problems that comprise indicating how much a combination of water and juice they would taste of a strawberry. Results show that children not only improve in their non-symbolic proportional reasoning, but also their ability to solve problems with symbolic proportions. However, some of the limitations of this study were the lack of ecological validity, as the training involved performing individually computerized tasks, and its high cost, as each child required a computer. In the current study, we aim to answer 3 research questions. The first one is better inhibitory control associated with better proportional reasoning in discrete contexts? The second one, can continuous and discrete proportional reasoning be improved through intervention? And the third one, does better inhibitory control predict larger learning gains in discrete contexts? To preview, we found that yes, children with higher inhibitory control had better proportional reasoning, particularly in contexts where discrete information was at odds with proportional knowledge. Yes, children improved their continuous proportional reasoning after a Cuisenaire intervention. However, discrete proportional knowledge was hindered. And no, children with lower inhibitory control were those to show larger learning gains. Now I'm going to show you how we come to these answers. We first evaluated 49 second graders who yet to receive fraction instruction from a Newark public school. Before the intervention started, all children went through an assessment which, among other measures, included a measure of inhibitory control, the hearts and flowers task, a measure of proportional reasoning, the spinner's task. And to answer our first question, that is whether inhibitory control is associated with proportional reasoning, we're going to look at the relationship between these two measures. In the spinner's task, our measure of proportional reasoning, children were shown a pair of spinners and asked to choose the proportionally larger red area across two formats. The continuous format, in which the spinners were only divided into two segments, the red and the blue, and the discrete adjacent, in which the blue and red segments were further divided into smaller segments. In this format, the number of segments could be consistent with the proportional information, and those were counting consistent, or they could be misleading. That is, now the spinner with the larger proportional red area was the one with the smaller number of segments. In the hearts and flowers task, children had to press a key as soon as they saw a figure. As more specifically, in the hearts block, they have to press on the same side as where the figure appeared. On the flowers block, they have to press on the opposite side as where the flowers appeared. And in the mix block, they saw interspersed hearts and flowers. As expected, in the pre-training session, children had a lower performance in the trials that require the most inhibitory control demands, that is, the mix block. But what about the spinner's task? Before the intervention, children reliably chose the spinner with the proportionally larger red area in the continuous format. However, children in the discrete adjacent format were only able to choose the correct spinner in the consistent trials, but fail in the misleading trials. And in this case, their performance was not better than guessing. And these trials were the ones in which the proportional information and the counting information was at odds. More importantly, we found that children who had higher scores in the hearts and flowers task were also better at this type of trials, the misleading trials. Notably, this relationship was not as strong with performance in the continuous format or even in the discrete format. These results suggest that it's not the overall difficulty of the format or the discrete information by itself, but the conflict between the discrete and proportional information that links proportional reasoning with inhibitory control. To answer whether proportional reasoning is malleable, we divided children into two groups. A group of 14 children who participated in the intervention and a group of 15 children who formed the control group. The intervention comprised two phases. In the first phase, children became familiarized with Cuisenaire rods and manipulated absolute magnitudes, physically, orally, and symbolically. And in the second phase, children represented and compared non-symbolic proportions. non-symbolic and symbolic proportions. Notably, during both phases, children initially work with physical rods and then slowly transitions to use letters to refer to the rods. After the 24 sessions, children in the intervention group and children in the control group completed the post-intervention assessment, which comprised the same measures as the pre-assessment, that is, the inhibitory control task and the proportional reasoning task. In particular, we were interested in whether children of the intervention group were able to transfer the recently acquired knowledge of symbolic proportions and proportions of lengths to area models like the ones they use in the spinner's task. So going from proportions represented as Cuisenaire rods to proportions represented as area models as the spinners. We first look at learning gains in the continuous format. We found that children in the control group did not show any change in their performance as expected. In contrast, children in the intervention group show reliable changes in their ability to compare continuous proportions. Then we look at changes in the discrete adjacent format. In the consistent trials, we found a small but not significant increase. However, and unexpectedly, we found that children in the intervention group decreased their performance in the counting misleading trials. And remember, these counting misleading trials are where the proportional and the counting information are at odds. In contrast, children in the control group did not show any change. So the performance in the consistent and misleading trials remained the same after this period of time. Finally, we investigated whether performance during the pre-intervention assessment was related to changes in the continuous and discrete misleading format. However, contrary to our expectations, we found a negative relationship between inhibitory control and learning gains in both continuous and discrete format, suggesting that children with low inhibitory control were those who show larger learning gains after the intervention. Notably, these relationships were not found in the control group. To summarize, we found that children with higher inhibitory control had better proportional reasoning, particularly in contexts where discrete information was at odds with proportional knowledge. Second, we found that children improved their continuous proportional reasoning after the Cuisenaire intervention. However, they decreased in their discrete proportional skills. And finally, we found that children with lower inhibitory control were those to show larger learning gains. The next questions that we would like to shed light on are: how can we improve non-symbolic and symbolic proportional reasoning in conflicting contexts? That is, in which ways can we help students to overcome the conflicting and misleading discrete information? And the second question is, how do cognitive abilities interact with different types of instructions? Here, we found that intensive conceptual training helped children with low inhibitory control. However, other studies have found that training that focuses on teaching procedural steps help children with higher cognitive skills. Finally, I would like to finish by thanking all the people who participated in the study and the MLK school and the students who participated in the study. And thank you all for your attention.